The ending of World War I left severe instability throughout Germany. The Peace of Paris in 1919 was a meeting of the Big Four, France, Italy, U.S., and Britain, where they met to discuss the consequences of the war. Although the powers were looking for common ground and a peace that would last, they were also looking to punish Germany. Germany was forced to sign a Treaty of Versailles. They had to pay 121 billion gold marks, make coal payments, disband their military, and take full responsibility for World War I. This treaty was one of the leading causes of World War II. After signing the treaty, the people of Germany felt as though their government had stabbed them in the back, thus leading to the lack of support towards the government. The lack of the support towards the government led to an opportunity for a new rise in power, the Nazi Party. World War I ended in 1918 with a total of 37 million casualties. Many believe the aftermath of World War I put Germany in a terrible situation, which allowed Adolf Hitler to exploit the situation, thus later gaining control. There was a cemetery created after World War I for those lost in battle. Soldiers who could both be identified and those who could not were buried in proper graves throughout this large cemetery. Adolf Hitler was regularly photographed with a stern and emotionless expression. Often highlighted on his wardrobe was the swastika, which later became the Nazi symbol. Hitler was also, however, regularly photographed in his military uniform. There were generally 3 uniforms worn for the Nazi soldiers. They represented the different ranks of the members of the army, and the elaborate designs of the uniform varied based on rank. One thing all of the uniforms had in common, however, were the badges worn by the soldiers. The swastika was the front and center image depicted on the badge. The badge was worn as a sign of power and control, and also as a way of setting apart the soldiers from the other members of society. Hitler was photographed giving his speech before his attempt to take over the government of Bavaria. Hitler is said to be one of the greatest speakers in history because of his charismatic attitude and the way he presented his speeches made people want to listen, even if they were not always listening to what he was saying, but more to how he was saying it. Bavaria is the first place that Hitler tried to take over during his reign. This is also where he was arrested and held in prison. Landsberg prison was where Hitler was held following his arrest. He later went back and did an interview there alongside his fellow Nazi members. Hitler was often paraded through the streets of Germany with the soldiers marching beside the car as an expression of control. His arm extended out was the sign of Hail Hitler, which the troops and supporting Germans did as a sign of respect and a show of support. Soldiers often lined up members of the Jewish party to alienate and publicly ridicule before arresting and eventually executing them. The Jews were seen as a disease throughout Germany. Hitler renounced the restrictions of the Treaty of Versailles in 1934. During this time, Hitler was beginning his re-airment process. Hitler enforced the Nuremberg laws. These laws essentially alienated the Jews and other alienable citizens of their rights in society. It also made it difficult to escape the intensified persecution. The Nazi Party would often alienate the Jews. The Nazis forced the Jews to wear the Star of David as a symbol showing they were Jewish. If they were caught not wearing it, they were harshly persecuted. The Star of David was often sewn onto the clothing of the Jews. Dachau concentration camp was the first camp created by the Nazis. It was built 2 weeks after Hitler took total control over Germany. The concentration camps were essentially prisons with separate buildings. Communist, socialist, German liberals, and anyone considered an enemy of the Nazis were held in these camps. At first, however, there were work camps created as well. The Nazi government figured if they could keep the Jews out of sight, but make them useful and have them work, that would be beneficial to them all. Prisoners were often protested at the camps. Jews as well as gypsies were forced to live in these camps. These camps were where they were tortured and then eventually executed. The prisoners were poorly taken care of in camps. They slept on what were essentially shelves and were very malnutritioned. They were provided with very little clothing and often were forced to go barefoot. Often they were tattooed with barcodes as a way of representing who they were. They were essentially their serial numbers. Gas chambers were a form of execution within the camps. The Jews were gathered up in fairly large groups, taken into these chambers, which looked like large rooms, locked, and then gassed to death. Prisoners were often taken into the middle of the courtyard to be executed by the firing squad. This was another form of execution throughout the camps. Usually, one or more individuals were gunned down by several firing upon them. The firing squad was responsible for 3,474 deaths. The soldiers paraded the streets of Denmark celebrating Hitler's birthday. after Hitler invaded Denmark in June of 1941, launching an attack on his former partner, Stalin. This invasion was said to be the first fatal mistake of the war. After seeing the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, Hitler, too, decided to declare war on the United States. This declaration, along with his war on Stalingrad, sealed Germany's fate. Hitler announced Germany would be declaring war on the United States on December 12, 1941. Hitler's rise to power stemmed off of the Nazi ideology of intense nationalism. Aryans were the pure race in Germany. Anti-Semitism was highly supported by the Nazis, even though it had been going through Europe long before Hitler took over. In 1938, Time magazine's Man of the Year was Adolf Hitler. Although this was a highly controversial decision, it was done as a tactic to show what Hitler was capable of accomplishing and to convince people Hitler was a danger to the world. Unfortunately, this effort failed. September 1939 marked the beginning of World War II. On June 6, 1944, also known as D-Day, was the day that liberated France and was a turning point in the war. On September 2nd, 1945, 6 years and a day to the start of the war, World War II ended with a peace treaty. There were between 19 and 25 million military deaths. 6 million Jews were murdered. There was an estimated 120 million casualties throughout the war, and the war cost $288 billion to fight.